Jax's revenge domain. The moment Howard Phillips said this whole project would move twice as fast if Dylan was running point, the conference room went dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop. I was sitting at the end of that long table, the only guy from the construction side in a room full of suits, and every head turned my way like I was some kind of sideshow attraction. They pretended it was just a casual comment. It wasn't. It was a shot fired with surgical precision. I'm Cole Adams, 47 years old, and people call me Tank. Been in construction management for over 20 years, ever since I got out of the Navy Seabees. Worked my way up from pouring concrete to running job sites for Lone Star Construction here in Dallas. Thought I'd seen every kind of corporate nonsense there was, but Howard was playing a whole different game. Walter Webb, our founder and CEO, just sat there at the head of the table. Didn't even blink. The board members were watching him like they were waiting for some kind of signal, but Walter just folded his hands and stayed quiet. For now. Howard leaned forward with that fake smile of his. Dylan understands the pace our government clients expect. Tank's methods are thorough. The way he said thorough made it sound like I was holding everyone back. Dylan Phillips sat 3 seats down from me, looking like he'd walked out of some MBA recruiting poster. Fresh business degree from UT, expensive suit, and this smug grin that comes from never having dirt under your fingernails. When our eyes met, he gave me this little nod like he was already picking out my parking spot. I felt that resignation letter in my jacket pocket. I'd printed it the night before, not because I wanted to quit, but because I could see the writing on the wall. Howard had been setting this up for months, and today's meeting was just the final push. The Morrison Industrial job was our biggest government contract this year. $12 million project to build new maintenance facilities at the Naval Air Station outside Dallas. I'd been working on the specs for 8 months, dealing with Navy brass, OSHA regulations, and enough red tape to wrap around Texas twice. Now Howard wanted to hand it over to his kid like it was some kind of birthday present. I stood up slow. "If you want your son to handle the Morrison Industrial job," I said, keeping my voice steady, "then this belongs to you." I put the folded letter on the table. Dylan's grin got wider. Howard looked like Christmas morning. But Walter finally spoke up. "Fine," he said, voice giving nothing away. "Give the project to Dylan." Then he looked right at me. "Tank, my office in 10 minutes. Bring that letter." His tone didn't show anger or sympathy. It showed nothing at all. And somehow that was worse than either. That's when I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. See, I came to Dallas 3 years ago after my divorce, figured Texas would be a fresh start. Had my truck, my tools, and 15 years of Seabees experience building everything, from airstrips to bridges in places you can't find on most maps. Linda and I had split up back in San Antonio after I got laid off from that petroleum services company when oil prices crashed. She got the house, I got the debt, and we both agreed Josh would be better off staying put to finish high school. Lone Star was supposed to be different, veteran-owned company that valued experience over politics. Walter Webb had started it in 1998 after retiring as a Marine Corps colonel. The company motto was painted right there on the lobby wall: honor, integrity, excellence. I believed in that when I signed my contract. When I started here, Howard barely knew I existed. We'd pass in the hallway, he'd give me a quick nod, keep walking. Back then, his indifference was easier to handle than what came later. Howard was operations director, moved over from some corporate consulting firm about 5 years before I arrived. Never wore work boots, never got his hands dirty, but he knew how to talk. The corporate talk that impressed the board. During the 2021 supply chain mess, when lumber prices went through the roof and half our subcontractors were backed up for months, I spent 14-hour days restructuring work schedules to keep 4 major projects on track. Found alternative suppliers, renegotiated delivery schedules, even drove to Oklahoma myself to pick up materials when trucking got delayed. Saved the company close to $2 million in penalty clauses and kept our government contracts in good standing. My old site supervisor, Jenny Carter, used to say I had a gift for seeing around corners. "Tank, you always know which fire to put out first," she'd tell me. And I knew she meant it. Howard called it luck. Should have been my first warning that we weren't living in the same reality. The thing about construction management is that it's not just about reading blueprints and managing schedules. It's about understanding how things actually get built in the real world, where weather delays, your concrete pour, where your electrical subcontractor calls in sick the same day the inspector shows up, where you discover the architectural drawings don't match what's actually in the ground. That knowledge comes from years of standing in mud at 6 a.m., figuring out how to make things work. Dylan showed up about 18 months ago. Howard brought him around like he was showing off a prize horse. Fresh perspective, he kept saying, looking right at me like a business degree could replace 2 decades of knowing how things actually get built. Dylan shook my hand with that practiced smile. "I've heard your construction management is solid," he said, and the pause before solid told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in his mind. The changes started small. A meeting that should have included construction input suddenly didn't need my department. A safety report I wrote came back with whole sections rewritten to remove my name. Data I'd verified got edited before it reached the board, smoothing over Dylan's mistakes and erasing my corrections. When I mentioned it to my crew, Rodriguez pulled me aside by the equipment shed. "We see it happening, Tank. But what can we do? You know how Howard operates." I knew. And I could feel the ground shifting under my feet long before Howard tried to push me out completely. The thing I didn't know then was how far Howard was willing to go to make his son look like the next big thing in construction management. Dylan walked into Lone Star like the place had been built just for him. He had that polished confidence of someone who'd never been told he was wrong. A business degree he waved around like it was some kind of construction license, and a last name that opened doors his resume never could. Looking forward to learning the ropes, he told me his first week. The way he said it made it clear the learning part was optional. The shift started quiet. A technical spec I'd finalized came back with Dylan's notes scribbled all over it. "Just updating the language," he said, even though his changes created problems I had to fix later. The kid had somehow convinced himself that changing concrete cure time, minimum 28 days to concrete cure time as needed, was an improvement. Never mind that federal regulations specify exactly what minimum means. In a crew meeting, I was explaining new OSHA protocols when Dylan jumped in halfway through. "Actually, I covered this with the guys on Monday," he announced. The whole crew looked back and forth between us like they were watching a tennis match. Rodriguez started to say something, but I shook my head. Not worth embarrassing the kid in front of everyone. A few days later, one of my foremen, Martinez, pulled me aside by the equipment shed. "Dylan came by yesterday," he said quietly. "Told us the company needs more innovative thinking. Said Tank's methods were solid, but old school." I felt that burn in my throat, but kept my voice level. "Thanks for the heads up. Thing is," Martinez continued, "he couldn't answer basic questions about load-bearing requirements. Had to look everything up on his phone. That should have been a red flag for anyone paying attention." But Howard wasn't interested in red flags. He was interested in grooming his successor. The more Dylan pushed, the more Howard praised him. "He sees the big picture," Howard said in a meeting, hand on Dylan's shoulder. "We can't get stuck doing things the old way forever." Board members started using the exact same phrases Howard used. Innovation, fresh leadership, cutting dead weight. Their eyes always drifted my way when they said it. I started keeping records, emails, timestamps, project changes, conversations. Didn't know what I'd need it for, but I could feel things moving faster than I could control. My daddy used to say, "Son, when you're in a knife fight, you better know where all the sharp edges are." This felt like a knife fight, except I was the only one who knew we were fighting. This Henderson site incident Howard kept referencing happened back in 2019 before Dylan even showed up. We'd had a subcontractor try to rush a foundation pour during a weather warning. I shut down the whole job, sent everyone home, and took the heat from the client about delays. Turned out to be the right call when that storm dropped 3 inches of rain in 2 hours. The foundation would have been ruined, cost us $300,000 to fix, and probably gotten someone hurt. Howard wasn't there that day. He was back in the office writing reports about weather contingencies while I was standing in the mud making actual decisions. But somehow, Dylan had gotten hold of my incident reports and started talking about them like he'd been part of the solution. Howard's first quarterly review landed in my inbox on a Thursday morning. Looked routine enough, but when I opened it up, my name appeared exactly once, buried in a footnote at the bottom. Site management support provided as needed. I stared at that line for a long time, then forwarded it to my team. Martinez responded right away. "What about the supply chain fixes in the Morrison bid restructure?" I typed back, "Ask Howard." But I knew he wouldn't. None of them would. That's how corporate politics works. You don't question the narrative unless you want to become part of the problem. At the next leadership meeting, Howard put his updated report on the screen. As you can see, he said, tapping the slide, project delays stem from outdated management approaches. Tank's methods worked fine years ago, but current demands require different thinking. I kept my eyes on the table. Outdated approaches meant anything I'd built over 2 decades. The safety protocols that had kept us accident-free for 3 years. The supplier relationships that got us materials when other companies were scrambling. The crew training programs that had our guys certified on equipment most companies couldn't even afford. Dylan leaned forward with fake humility. I've been testing some streamlined processes. With proper support, we can cut weeks off delivery times. Board member Sarah Sullivan nodded. Speed is everything with government contracts. I spoke up, keeping my voice calm but firm. Speed without proper safety protocols puts workers at risk. Several steps Dylan removed are required by federal OSHA standards. Howard's smile got tighter. Standards can be updated with proper justification. They can, I said, but not without disclosing operational changes to contract administrators. That's federal law. The room went quiet for a moment. Then another board member jumped in, using Howard's exact words from earlier. We need innovation, not resistance to change. There it was. Those phrases don't travel that far unless someone's been planting them. Through all of this, Walter Webb sat at the head of the table, hands folded, face unreadable. He didn't agree, didn't disagree, just watched. The old Marine in him probably saw exactly what was happening, but he was letting it play out. I'd seen that look before back in the service. It's the look a commanding officer gets when he's gathering intelligence before making a move. By the end of that meeting, the writing was on the wall. The board wasn't just hearing Howard, they were buying what he was selling. And Walter's silence meant he saw exactly what was happening but wasn't ready to step in yet. I walked out wondering what that silence was really about and why he wanted to see how far Howard would push. Walter's office door was already open when I got there, resignation letter in hand. He didn't tell me to sit, just looked at me with that expression I couldn't read. Close the door, Tank. I did. My hands were sweating, the letter getting warm from holding it too tight. He nodded at the paper. You brought that this morning? Yes, sir. Why? His voice was level, not accusing. Almost curious. I met his eyes. Howard's been clearing the path for Dylan for months. Today wasn't spontaneous. If I stayed quiet any longer, I'd become the excuse they needed to tear apart everything we've built here. Walter studied me for a long moment. What do you think Dylan can't handle? I didn't sugarcoat it. The technical specs, the safety protocols, the regulatory requirements I put in place after the Henderson site incident in 2019. There are systems that only work because they were built with field experience. Pull the wrong piece and the whole thing falls apart. He exhaled slowly. I suspected as much. Suspected what? My pulse jumped. That Howard's been falsifying progress reports, he said. Covering Dylan's mistakes, presenting selective data. Numbers haven't been adding up, but I needed confirmation. I held my breath. And now you have it? I do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and slid a business card across to me. Gulf Coast Construction Consulting. They're one of our critical partners on the Morrison project. I frowned. You want me to work for them? I want you somewhere Howard can't manipulate you or the data, he said. If you resign, I'll accept it. But your expertise is too valuable to be buried under his politics. The card felt heavier than it should have. Walter wasn't dismissing me. He was positioning me, and I was starting to understand I'd been standing on a chessboard without knowing it. This stays between us, he added. Howard thinks he's won. Let him think that for now. I looked at the business card. Amanda Wilson, Director of Operations. What exactly am I supposed to do there? Gulf Coast handles third-party compliance review for all our government contracts. They've been asking questions about discrepancies in our Morrison project reports for weeks. I've been telling them we're investigating internally. Walter leaned back in his chair. Now we really are. The pieces started clicking together in my head. You've been planning this. I've been preparing for this, he corrected. There's a difference. I hoped I was wrong about Howard, but I needed to be ready if I wasn't. Walter stood up and walked to his window overlooking the construction yard. You know what I learned in the Marines, Tank? Sometimes the best way to deal with a problem is to give it enough rope to hang itself. Howard's been getting sloppy because he thinks he's already won. And if he hasn't been falsifying reports? Walter turned back to me. Then you'll do a routine compliance review, find everything in order, and we'll all move forward. But if he has... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I stood up, resignation letter still in my hand. Keep that, Walter said, nodding at the letter. You might need it for the paperwork trail, but don't submit it yet. Let's see what Gulf Coast finds first. Gulf Coast Construction Consulting welcomed me with professional smiles and a stack of files that could have used their own warehouse. Their office was in a sleek building about 10 miles from Lone Star, all glass and steel that probably cost more per square foot than most people make in a year. Amanda Wilson turned out to be a former Army Corps of Engineers officer, about 45, with the kind of direct manner that comes from years of dealing with contractors who think regulations are suggestions. We appreciate you stepping in, Amanda said, handing me the first binder. Lone Star's reports haven't matched our field observations for months. Walter said you're the only person who can explain the discrepancies. Only person. Those words hit something in my chest. I sat at a desk near Amanda's office and opened the top file. First page showed a timeline I recognized from my original Morrison project plan, but the next few pages were wrong. Steps removed, milestones relabeled, cost projections smoothed into suspiciously clean numbers. I flagged one section and called Amanda over. Where did this come from? Howard sent it, she said. Claimed the construction team approved the modifications. I kept my voice steady. I never approved any of this. She frowned. Then why does his report say you streamlined these processes? Because he needed Dylan to look like a genius, I thought, but I didn't say that yet. 2 hours later, Amanda came back with another file. Tank, look at these safety logs. They don't match your original protocols. She was right. They didn't. The logs marked as Dylan's efficiency improvements were identical to preliminary drafts I'd written months earlier. Drafts I'd never released because they weren't ready. The timestamps showed Dylan submitting them 6 months after I'd written them, but the content was word for word from my files. I called Rodriguez back at Lone Star. Did Howard access my project files recently? He hesitated. Tank, he asked for admin access last month, said it was for compliance audit. Didn't think I could say no. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Gulf Coast's documents weren't revealing a misunderstanding. They were revealing deliberate fraud. Howard hadn't just altered reports. He'd stolen my work, rebranded it, and used it to make his son look competent. By day 3 at Gulf Coast, the evidence wasn't whispering anymore. It was screaming. Every document I opened pointed to the same architect, Howard Phillips. I spread 3 reports across the desk. Amanda stood behind me as I traced a line with my finger. This cost projection, I said, is built on Dylan's supposedly improved efficiency rates. Amanda leaned closer. But this safety log shows the original error calculations. My error calculations, I corrected her. Dylan copied them and changed the timestamps. She sucked in a breath. How many files? Enough to make incompetence look like innovation. The next file was worse. Budget reallocations I'd never authorized. Tens of thousands shifted to Dylan's pilot projects, all signed off with forged approvals using my electronic signature. I flipped to the authorization page. Here, I said. He claimed the cost savings came from my department restructuring. That's impossible. Amanda's voice dropped. Tank, this is deliberate fraud. I nodded. He inflated Dylan's performance and buried every mistake under my name. Howard signed off on all of it. Amanda left and came back with their compliance officer, Gary Collins. Our system flagged major inconsistencies, Gary said. Your findings triggered an automatic audit. I didn't celebrate, just handed him the folder. These are the discrepancies. Use them however your protocols require. He scanned the pages and whistled low. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is intentional falsification. Send it to Walter Webb, I said, and the board. They need to see it exactly as it is. Gary nodded. We'll send it today. By late afternoon, Gulf Coast's formal audit report was already on its way to Lone Star Construction, complete with signatures, timestamps, and confirmation that the altered files originated under Howard's authorization. The house of cards he'd built, meeting by meeting, lie by lie, was about to collapse under its own weight. The emergency meeting happened less than 24 hours after Gulf Coast sent their audit. I wasn't invited, but Rodriguez called me the minute he stepped out of the boardroom. "Tank, it was brutal," he whispered. I could hear voices behind him, raised and desperate. Then Walter's voice cut through everything, steady and cold. "Howard, explain the discrepancies." There was shuffling, stammering, then Howard's weak response. "Those files were taken out of context." Walter didn't budge. "Gulf Coast traced the alterations to your authorization codes. Not context. Control." Sarah Sullivan's voice followed, driving the point home. "You misled us, Howard, for months." Dylan tried to jump in. Dad didn't mislead anyone. The data was misinterpreted. "Sit down, Dylan," Walter said. "No anger, just command. Your modified protocols failed the minute Tank left. The audit shows you removed federally. Required safety steps." Dylan's voice cracked. He could have helped if he hadn't quit. Sarah cut him off. "He quit because you two pushed him out." Rodriguez whispered, "Tank, you should have seen their faces." Another board member spoke next. "Dylan will be removed from all project authority immediately." Dylan sputtered, "You can't do this." Walter overrode him. "And Howard Phillips is terminated, effective immediately." The room fell silent. I could almost feel it through the phone. Reputations crashing, careers ending, justice finally catching up. Then Sarah said something I didn't expect. "We owe Tank Adams an apology." Rodriguez exhaled. "They all agreed, Tank, even Walter." I pressed my hand to my chest, keeping my voice steady. "Copy that." I ended the call before the emotion could spill over. Justice was happening, but I still didn't know what it meant for my future. Walter chose a small diner near Love Field, far from Lone Star's corporate towers and polished conference rooms. When I walked in, he was already seated with an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Tank, sit." I did, keeping myself steady, even though my nerves were humming. He folded his hands. "You handled this with real professional about it." I met his eyes. "I handled the truth. That's all." "That," he said quietly, "was exactly what I needed you to do." I frowned. "You needed me to leave Lone Star?" "I needed you outside Howard's reach," he replied. "If you'd stayed, he would have buried you under enough false documentation to confuse even the board. Gulf Coast was the only place he couldn't tamper with your findings." I thought about that. The resignation that felt like an ending had been part of a larger strategy, one I hadn't known I was part of. Walter leaned forward. "Integrity has always been your strength. You don't inflate numbers, you don't play politics, you work with facts, and that's rare." I stayed quiet, waiting. He placed a folder on the table. "This is a long-term consulting contract. You'd work with Gulf Coast and report directly to me, not as an employee, but as a partner." The word hit like a hammer blow to my chest. "Partner?" Walter nodded. "You'd lead safety and project management for the contracts we're starting next quarter. No internal politics, no interference, full authority." I breathed slowly, letting the weight of it settle. Not a return to Lone Star. Not a second chance inside the same broken system. Something completely different. Something where I wouldn't have to shrink to survive. "I'll review the contract tonight," I said. Walter allowed the faintest smile. "Take your time. This is your future to decide." As I left that diner, I realized the vindication I'd imagined, walking back into Lone Star victorious, was too small for the life opening up in front of me. I signed the consulting contract with Gulf Coast on a Tuesday morning. No ceremony, no handshakes beyond Amanda's warm smile. The signature felt less like closure and more like oxygen finally reaching a part of me that had been suffocated too long. The numbers were real. Base consulting rate of $125 per hour, guaranteed 40 hours per week, plus performance bonuses tied to project milestones. Walter's partnership deal included equity stakes in the new veteran-owned division. After 18 months of watching my work get stolen and my reputation attacked, I was looking at nearly double my old Lone Star salary. Later that afternoon, Rodriguez called. His voice was steady in a way I hadn't heard in months. "It's official," he said. "Howard's termination is permanent. Dylan's completely out too. Board said the falsified reports voided any appeals." I exhaled slowly. "Their choices, not mine." "I know," he replied. "Everyone knows." He paused. "Company's restructuring. Compliance is rewriting half our policies. People keep saying your resignation didn't break Lone Star. The lies about you did. Walter stopped by Gulf Coast later that week. Didn't knock, just appeared in the doorway with that same unreadable expression. Settling in? I am, I said. Good, he replied. There's a larger contract coming after this one. Multi-year safety overhaul for the entire Southwest region. You'll lead it. I nodded. I'm ready. Board approved the budget yesterday. 7-figure contract. Your piece will set you up for the next decade. That evening, I drove to pick up my son Josh from his community college. He'd been quiet about the whole Lone Star situation, but I could tell he was watching how I handled it. 19 years old, trying to figure out what kind of man he wanted to become. Dad, he said as he got in the truck, still carrying his welding gear. Professor Davis heard about your new job, said Gulf Coast is a big deal. I glanced at him. It is. And you're like a partner now? Yeah, I am. Josh Adams was quiet for a moment, then said something that hit me harder than any board meeting ever could. I told the guys at school my dad doesn't back down when people try to screw him over, but he doesn't get mad about it either. He just handles it. I had to swallow before I could respond. Sometimes the best way to win is to walk away and build something better. That's pretty cool, Dad. Later that night, I called my ex-wife, Linda. We'd been divorced for 3 years, and things had been tense during the Lone Star mess. She'd worried about my ability to provide stable support payments, especially with Josh looking at trade school programs. Cole, she said when she picked up. Josh told me about the partnership. It's a good opportunity, I said. He also said you handled everything without losing your temper. That matters to him, you know. He's been watching. I leaned against my kitchen counter looking out at the Dallas skyline. I figured as much. The financial stability helps too, she admitted. Trade school is expensive, and I was worried. You don't need to worry anymore, I said. This contract will cover Josh's education and then some. There was a pause. I'm proud of you, Cole, for not letting them break you. After we hung up, I stepped outside onto my back porch. The night air was humid, typical Texas weather, but it felt different somehow, cleaner. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. First project review meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Walter will be there. Big things ahead. I typed back, ready for it. And I was. For the first time in years, I was working with people who valued what I brought to the table instead of trying to diminish it. Walter hadn't just offered me a job. He'd given me a platform to build the kind of career I'd always believed was possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. Howard had pushed me out to make room for his incompetent son. In doing so, he'd freed me to become something bigger than I ever could have been inside Lone Star's political machine. They used to rely on my work and pretend they didn't. Now they'd rely on the systems I create without ever being able to control me. Again. Howard and Dylan destroyed their own careers trying to destroy mine, and I hadn't had to lift a finger against them. The truth had done all the work. Sometimes the best revenge is just refusing to stay small when other people need you to. In the end, competence doesn't need permission to shine. It just needs the right stage. And sometimes that stage is built by walking away from the wrong audience. The most powerful revenge against those who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong. It's building a life so successful that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Sometimes the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed to protect the wrong people, and your only real choice is to build a better system somewhere else. The moment you stop needing their validation is the moment you become truly dangerous to people who survive on politics instead of performance.